Food, which is an interdisciplinary talk series as well this semester. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's talk by Kerry Preibisch in the Sociology and Biology Department, Global Labor, the Local Food Movement's Blind Spot. I also wanted to let you know about our next talk in the series, which is Wednesday, October 20th, and that will be Adam Snade and Alexander Legogo from Geography and Political Science. And they're speaking on food security perspectives in Central Africa. That's Wednesday, October 30th in this room. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kerry Preibisch.
Well, thank you, Monique, for this opportunity to present my research and, more importantly, for your interest in including labor issues within your seminar series on the ethics and politics of food. And thank you to all of you who came out on a Wednesday afternoon. It's great to see so many faces that I haven't seen in a long, well, to see so many faces first, and then also to see a lot of faces that I haven't seen for a while because I've just spent the past year in the UK. So after spending that year in the UK, I must say it's really good to be here. Fall is a beautiful time in Canada. The changing autumn leaves, the harvest moons, and those surprising sunny days that warm up the crispest of mornings motivate many of us to make the most of the season before the cold weather hits. So this is a time to head to the farmer's market to buy the last of the summer bounty. I'm counting on tomatoes. I'm hoping that there's some left. To take children apple picking, to pick up a pumpkin pie at one of those on-farm country markets, or maybe stop at the side of the road to get one of those autumnal hued chrysanthemums to decorate our porches. But it's perhaps this time of year and these fall products and experiences, perhaps like no others, that bring us closest to agricultural production in Canada. Indeed, for some of us, it is the only time of the year when we set foot on a farm. At Thanksgiving, it's also the time that we're most likely to thank a farmer, if not in spoken prayer, but in our minds as we carve up that corn-fed organic turkey or tuck into the pumpkin pie. What many Canadians don't know is that the supply of these local harvest time products that I mentioned, apples, pumpkin pies, and chrysanthemums, depend on the labor power of tens of thousands of non-citizen migrants from over 70 nations in the world, who form part of the 338,000 migrant workers currently residing in the country. These men and women are largely missing from the local food narrative that we embrace in the harvest season. In fact, farm workers in general, including those holding Canadian citizenship, are absent from the local food narrative. This local food narrative manufactures nostalgic images of food production in Canada, one in which farming is presented as a sanitized, almost romantic activity carried out by white people. The latest Foodland Ontario ad, still reproducing the Good Things Grow in Ontario jingle, begins with children running through a field past an idyllic red brick farmhouse to the white producers who lovingly place immaculate food products on a silver assembly line that ribbons its way through gilded pastures to consumers in the supermarkets, including a little girl that embodies multiculturalism and symbolizes the most desirable immigrant profile, middle class and educated. And I think I'm going to be able to show that to you, so let's just try it. Oh, of course. I always think when it's plugged in, it shouldn't ask us to do this, but so now it should work.
It's closer than you think. It's down the road or around the corner. It's a short walk from where you are right now. It's fresh, it's local, and it's made for you.
Good things grow in Ontario.
Oh, it took us back to the beginning, but that's okay. Closer to home, here in Guelph, in the Guelph Mercury, the current ad being run by Borealis Grill features one of their chefs kneeling in a pristine carrot field, gently easing the soil from freshly harvested carrots, likely to be placed next to the others so artfully displayed in the basket at his knee. It's also their Facebook profile or cover page, so there's a wider screenshot of it. But in both these advertisements, the nature of food production in Canada is portrayed as small-scale, artisanal, and almost noble activity. Farm workers are completely absent. Indeed, this local food narrative contributes heavily to the invisibility of farm workers, in particular, racialized migrant farm workers from the global south. That Canadians know little about migrant workers is hardly surprising. There's a long history of government and industry efforts to invisibilize the growing globalization of the labor force sustaining agriculture and food production in Canada. Moreover, the work regimes in which migrant workers are embedded are such that they have little time to integrate in dominant society, and their residences are far from where most Canadians live. But another part of the reason, suggested by the title of my talk, is that consumers, foodies, the food movement, and even academics who study food have shown little interest in the workers who sustain the food system. Indeed, local food and its preparation have been fetishized of late. And as Patricia Allen writes, quote, "Localization has been held up as an ideal and a solution to the environmental, social, and economic issues in the food system," end quote. While the hands that produce this food have largely been ignored. Well, most of the hands, particularly the brown and black ones. The white ones, the ones belonging to the farmer or the chef, often male, are part of the local food narrative. The narrative in which farmers are our heroes, chefs are celebrities, and locally oriented shops such as Mark McEwen have become tourist destinations. And indeed, when my sister was here from Vancouver this summer, the top thing on her list of things to do was to go to Mark McEwen's Don Mills shop. So in my talk today, I hope to shed light on the labor force sustaining local food production in Canada. First, by exposing its globalized character and how that came to be. Secondly, I will explore how temporary migration programs limit migrants' rights and the exercise of the rights they do have. And third, discuss the labor regimes that such programs enable. And finally, I will examine the absence of labor and immigration issues in alternative food initiatives and academia. And it's hoped that this discussion will take food movements, consumers, and academics to task for their fetishizing of food and its consumption and veneration of localization, while paying relatively little attention or no attention at all to the men and women farm workers and their families who sustain agriculture and food production in Canada. So I'm going to focus on migrant workers. And when I use that term in this presentation, I'm referring to what the government calls temporary foreign workers, people working in Canada on temporary employment authorization and with temporary visas for entry and residence. Of course, there's other components of the agricultural workforce who migrate to work in agriculture, including permanent resident and citizen newcomers, often living in suburbia, who are transported to the fields and greenhouses by contractors or gangmasters. Mennonites with dual citizenship who migrate from Mexico transnationally to take up seasonal work in Canada. Canadians who migrate from Aboriginal reserves and disadvantaged provinces, as well as a growing group comprised of illegalized workers, largely visa overstayers or refugee claimants that are under deportation orders. So when I speak of migrant workers today, I'm just focusing on that group holding temporary employment authorization, what the government refers to as foreign workers. The RBC scandal last year, which actually even made it into the UK news, in which one of the firm's suppliers had Canadian workers train the migrant workers who were due to replace them, was fortunate. I don't mean to suggest the fact that 45 people lost their positions. Well, eventually they didn't lose them entirely. They were reassigned in the company. That part isn't fortunate. But the timing of the scandal was fortunate. It took a group of white-collared workers to be on the receiving end of the problems inherent in the temporary foreign worker program to focus the country's attention on growing numbers of migrant workers and the problematic nature of the temporary foreign worker program. In 2011, some 300,000 migrant workers entered Canada, a figure that represents a tripling in migrant entries since 2000. And in this graph, I've got entries of all temporary residents, but migrant workers are in the red. And this one represents the numbers of temporary residents present in Canada. And what both these graphs do from CIC is indicate a significant shift in Canadian immigration policy, whereby numbers of new permanent residents have declined alongside rising numbers of migrants on temporary employment authorization. 40 years ago in this country, the majority of people who were entering to work shared the same rights as, most of the same rights as Canadian citizens. By 1993, they had become the minority. So and by 1993, 70% of people entering Canada to work were on temporary employment authorization with a much narrower set of rights and much reduced ability to exercise the rights that they were granted. So the balance has shifted tremendously. If we just look at jobs in agriculture, which is really a subsample of food system workers, in 2011, Canada approved more than 35,000 positions for migrants. And I'll talk about these little programs, these different programs as we go on. The incorporation of racialized workers with less than full citizenship has a long history in Canada, but it was in the 1960s that the government institutionalized this practice through formal guest worker programs. In 1966, the Canadian government signed a bilateral agreement with Jamaica to bring in 264 men to Ontario farms to fill seasonal shortages in agriculture. And that agreement formed the first of 5 that was signed with a number of Caribbean countries, and in 1974 with Mexico. This set of agreements is now known collectively as the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program. And this program allows employers of on-farm primary agriculture to hire migrants from Mexico or one of the 11 Caribbean partner countries on temporary contracts that last anywhere from 6 weeks to a maximum of 8 months, and according to negotiated wage rates.